עץ חיים היא למחזיקים בה ותומכיה מאושר תרחיה דרכי נועם וכל נתיבותיה שלום.
Shalom. This week's Torah portion is Shemot. And with this week's Torah portion, we begin the book of Exodus. Exodus contains the history of our people's 400 years of slavery in the land of Egypt. And it also celebrates our going out of Egypt, an event that we observe and we celebrate around the Seder table every Passover. The book of Shemot, that is the book of Exodus, also contains that great event in our people's history, actually a great event in human history, the giving of the Ten Commandments. It also speaks of the establishment of a judicial system and a code of civil law upon which Israelite society would be based. We also get a glimpse of what God's nature is like. We see this in Sedra Kitisa later on. We learn that God is a forgiving, a compassionate, a forbearing God. And we also read in the book of Exodus of that backsliding of our ancestors as our ancestors prevailed upon Aaron, that is Moses' brother, to build a golden calf. We backslid into idolatry for a while, and we paid a heavy price for that. And at the end of the book, we read of the description and the instructions for the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, that portable house of worship that we carried with us during our 40 years in the desert. Now, this week's Torah portion, Shemot, and actually the name of the book of Exodus, Shemot, comes from a word that appears in this first sentence of the book and this week's Torah portion. And these are the names, the Eli Shemot. And what we have listed at the beginning of this week's Torah portion is a list of the names of Jacob's sons who came with him from the land of Canaan during a great drought. And of course they would not return in their lifetimes, but their descendants would be there for the next 400 years. And it goes on to tell us that there were 70 souls, 70 direct descendants of Jacob who were counted among these people who came down with him. But interestingly, in verse 5 it says, Joseph was in Egypt. V'Yosef haya v'Mitzrayim. Why was Joseph mentioned separately from his brothers? Rashi picks up on this question. He says, were he, that is Joseph and his sons, not among the 70 souls mentioned earlier in the verse? What does the Torah teach us by mentioning Joseph specifically, Rashi asks. It could not be the fact that he was living in Egypt, for we would not have known, would we not have known that he was in Egypt? Of course, we already knew he was in Egypt. But this clause is included, says Rashi, to inform you of the righteousness of Joseph. He was the same Joseph who tended the flocks of his father, and he was the same Joseph who was in Egypt and became a king. And it goes on to say, Ve'omed betzidko, yet he stood firm in his righteousness, despite this radical change in his life. Isn't that interesting? Joseph's life had changed in remarkable ways. He did not look like the same person that he had been in the land of Canaan. He now was an Egyptian aristocrat. And yet he was that same person who he was when he was a simple shepherd back in the land of Canaan, looking after his father's flocks. He was constant. He was omed b'tzidko. He was constant in his righteousness. He had a moral compass as a young man. Now we know he was a man with flaws, as every human being has flaws, and yet he was honest. He was loyal to his father. He was loyal even to his brothers, with whom he had a very stormy relationship. He always spoke the truth. He only took what was his. And we see that he never changed. When he was sold into slavery and was the house servant to Potiphar in Egypt, and when Potiphar's wife approached him trying to seduce him, Joseph refused. He refused to take something that was not his own. He was straight and honest with the people that he was in prison with after Potiphar threw him in jail. And Pharaoh, and we believe it was Tutmosis II who elevated Joseph. Pharaoh must have been impressed with the steadiness of Joseph, that Joseph was constant in his values, his honesty, his integrity, his truthfulness. And here he was, the same man. It didn't matter whether he was poor, it didn't matter whether he was rich, it didn't matter whether he was powerless or the most powerful man in Egypt under the Pharaoh. It didn't matter whether he was unknown or a very famous person. He remained the same. There is a saying that every fortune begins with a theft. This week's Torah portion rejects that idea out of hand. What this Torah portion tells us is it is proper for us to try to be as successful as we can in our careers. It is fine for us to seek our fortunes, but we must always do so with integrity, as Joseph did, never departing from who we are, our Jewish values, and this is the proper way of conducting our lives. Now, I hope that you read this week's Torah portion and you will find some truths in it that maybe others have not yet uncovered. And that's the exciting thing about studying the Torah. Shabbat Shalom.